The smoke was already seeping through the gaps in the rough-hewn planks when Juliana Reeves realized her uncle meant to break her spirit or kill her trying. The year was 1878, and in the high desert country of Snake River, Idaho, men still believed they had the right to shape a woman's will with fear and pain. She pressed her face against the wooden slats, gasping for the thin streams of fresh air that leaked through, her eyes burning and her lungs screaming for relief. The smokehouse had been used for curing meat just days before, and the remnants of that process mixed with the fresh smoke her uncle Samuel was feeding into the small structure from outside. Juliana was 22 years old, and she had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing to marry the cattle baron her uncle had chosen for her. Silas Moreland was 53, cruel-eyed, and owned half the grazing land between Snake River and the mountains. Samuel Reeves had gambling debts that stretched from Idaho to Montana, and Moreland had offered to forgive them all in exchange for Juliana's hand. When she had said no, when she had stood in the parlor of her uncle's ranch house and stated plainly that she would rather scrub floors in a boarding house than marry that man, Samuel had backhanded her hard enough to split her lip. Then he had dragged her out to the smokehouse in the gray light of dawn. "You will learn respect," he had growled, throwing her inside. "You will learn fear, and when I let you out, you will accept Silas Moreland's proposal with gratitude." That had been hours ago. Juliana had lost track of time in the thick, choking darkness. She coughed until her throat was raw, until she tasted blood. Her dress was soaked with sweat despite the October chill, and her hands trembled as she tried again and again to force the door open. The lock held firm. Outside, she could hear voices occasionally, her uncle and his ranch hands going about their business as though nothing unusual was happening, as though a woman was not suffocating 20 feet from where they stood. She thought about her parents, dead these 5 years from the fever that had swept through the territory. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself, teaching school perhaps, or managing a shop. She had never dreamed of romance like the heroines in the novels she smuggled into her bedroom, but she had dreamed of dignity, of choice. Now even those modest hopes were being stolen from her, breath by breath. Juliana sank to her knees on the dirt floor, her vision swimming. She prayed, though she was not sure anyone was listening. She prayed for strength, for salvation, for an end to the burning in her chest. The smoke grew thicker, and the world began to fade at the edges. She did not hear the horse approach at a gallop. She did not hear the shouted words or the sound of a fist meeting flesh. What she heard finally was the sharp crack of metal breaking, and then light flooded the smokehouse as the door swung open. Hands, strong and sure, reached in and pulled her out into the clean air. Juliana collapsed onto the hard-packed earth of the ranch yard, coughing violently, her whole body shaking. Someone was kneeling beside her, a hand on her back, a low voice speaking words she could not quite make out through the roaring in her ears. Slowly, painfully, her vision cleared. She found herself looking up into the face of a man she had never seen before. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that needed cutting, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was sun-bronzed and lean, with a few days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore the rough clothes of a working cowboy, denim and leather, and a faded blue shirt, and there was a Colt revolver strapped to his hip. Blood was trickling from a cut above his eyebrow, fresh and bright. "Easy now," he said, and his voice was gentle despite the hardness in his eyes. "Just breathe. You are safe." Juliana tried to speak, but all that came out was another racking cough. The man, whoever he was, helped her sit up straighter, supporting her weight as though she weighed nothing at all. She became aware of other sounds then, shouting, the nervous stamping of horses, her uncle's voice raised in fury. "You have no right, Dalton. This is my property, and that girl is my responsibility." Juliana turned her head, still leaning against the stranger's shoulder, and saw the scene unfolding in the ranch yard. Samuel Reeves stood 10 feet away, his face purple with rage. 2 of his ranch hands flanked him, both armed, both watching the stranger with wary eyes. Near the corral fence, another man in ranch hand clothing was on the ground, holding his jaw and glaring murder at everyone. The stranger, this Dalton, helped Juliana to her feet with surprising care. Then he turned to face her uncle, and the change in his demeanor was like watching a summer storm roll in over the mountains. All the gentleness vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Your responsibility? Dalton's voice was quiet, but it carried across the yard like a whip crack. You locked her in a smokehouse. You were killing her. I was teaching her discipline, Samuel spat. Something her father should have done before he died and left her to my care. She is a disobedient, ungrateful girl who needs to learn her place. Dalton took a step forward, and Juliana saw her uncle's ranch hands tense. Her place is not in a smokehouse choking on smoke, Dalton said, and any man who thinks otherwise is not a man at all. Samuel's hand moved toward the gun at his belt, and Juliana's heart seized in her chest. But Dalton was faster. His Colt was drawn and leveled before Samuel's fingers even touched the grip of his weapon. The two ranch hands froze, their eyes fixed on the barrel of Dalton's gun. Do not, Dalton said softly. I have killed men for less than what you did today, Samuel Reeves. Much less. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Juliana's legs were shaking, but she forced herself to stand straight, to not show weakness in front of her uncle. She could feel Dalton's presence beside her like a shield. Finally, Samuel let his hand drop away from his gun. His eyes, when they fixed on Juliana, were full of venom. You think you are clever, girl? You think this drifter is going to save you? Silas Moreland will have you one way or another. He has been patient, but his patience has limits. And when this cowboy is gone, you will still be here. Still mine to deal with as I see fit. Juliana found her voice at last, rough and smoke-damaged though it was. I am not yours, she said. I am not anyone's, and I will never marry Silas Moreland. Samuel laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Then you will die penniless and alone because you have nothing, girl. Your father left debts, not money. This ranch, this land, it is all mine. Without my protection, without the marriage I have arranged for you, you are nothing. Then I will be nothing, Juliana said, and she was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I would rather be nothing than be yours to sell. Dalton holstered his gun with a smooth motion, but his hand stayed near it, ready. She is leaving with me, he said, right now, and if you or any of your men try to stop us, I will put bullets in you. That is not a threat. That is a promise. You cannot just take her, Samuel snarled. She is my ward, my niece. I will have the law on you for kidnapping. The law? Dalton's laugh was bitter. The nearest federal marshal is 3 days' ride from here, and the sheriff in Snake River is in Moreland's pocket. We both know it. You want to chase us, you are welcome to try. But you will not like how it ends. He turned to Juliana, and the hardness in his face softened just a fraction. Can you ride? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her throat still burned, and her head was spinning. But she would crawl to Montana on her hands and knees before she stayed another hour in her uncle's house. Dalton whistled, sharp and clear, and a beautiful bay gelding trotted over from where it had been ground tied near the gate. The horse was well-muscled and alert, with intelligent eyes that reminded Juliana of its rider. Dalton swung into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down to her. Put your foot on mine and grab my hand. Juliana did as he said, and he pulled her up behind him as though she weighed no more than a sack of flour. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of his body, the solid strength of him. The saddle was not built for two, but she held on tight. This is not over, Dalton, Samuel was shouting as Dalton turned the horse toward the gate. You hear me? This is not over. Moreland will hunt you both down, and when he does, I will watch him make you pay for this. Dalton did not answer. He urged the bay into a canter, and they left the ranch yard behind in a cloud of dust. Juliana pressed her face against his back, her arms locked around him, and tried not to think about the fact that she had just left behind everything she had ever known. Her clothes, her books, the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to her mother. All of it was gone now, as unreachable as the moon. They rode for an hour without stopping, heading north into the hills that rose like the backbone of some ancient beast between Snake River and the wilderness beyond. The October sun was warm on Juliana's back, but the wind carried the promise of winter. She shivered, and Dalton must have felt it because he slowed the horse to a walk and shrugged out of his leather jacket. "Put this on," he said, handing it back to her. "You will be cold," Juliana protested, but he shook his head. "I have been colder." "Put it on." She did, and the jacket was still warm from his body. It smelled of leather and horses and wood smoke. A good smell. A safe smell. Juliana pulled it tighter around herself and tried to process everything that had just happened. An hour ago, she had been suffocating in a smokehouse, certain she was going to die. Now she was riding through the hills with a stranger who had saved her life, fleeing from the only home she had known. "Who are you?" she asked finally, raising her voice to be heard over the sound of the horse's hooves. "Everett Dalton," he said without turning around. "I was riding through looking for work when I heard you coughing. I saw the smoke coming from the building and I knew something was wrong." "You could have been killed," Juliana said. "My uncle, he has killed men before. Everyone knows it, even if the law does not care." "I know," Everett said. "I have heard of Samuel Reeves, and I have heard of Silas Moreland too. They are both poisonous snakes wearing human skin." They rode in silence for a while longer, climbing higher into the hills. Juliana watched the landscape change around them, the scrub grass and sage giving way to juniper and pine. She had lived in Idaho all her life, but she had rarely left the valley where her uncle's ranch sat. This country was wild and strange, beautiful in a harsh way that made her chest ache. "Where are we going?" she asked. "There is a line cabin about 5 miles north of here," Everett said. "It belongs to the Broken Arrow Ranch, but they only use it during spring roundup. It will be empty now. We can rest there, get our bearings, and decide what to do next." "What to do next?" Juliana repeated. The enormity of her situation was starting to sink in. She had no money, no possessions, nowhere to go. She was entirely dependent on the charity of a man she had met less than 2 hours ago. "I do not even know how to thank you. You saved my life." Everett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No thanks needed. What your uncle did, what he was going to do, it was wrong. No woman deserves that. No person deserves that." There was something in his voice, some old pain that made Juliana wonder about his past. But she did not pry. She barely knew him, and he had already done more for her than anyone else in her life. The line cabin, when they reached it, was small and weathered but solid. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pines, with a creek running bright and cold nearby. Everett helped Juliana down from the horse, and she stood for a moment, swaying, her legs unsteady after the long ride. He caught her elbow to steady her. "You all right?" "Just dizzy," she said. "And my throat hurts." "The smoke," Everett said. He tied his horse to a post near the cabin, then pushed open the door. Inside was sparse but clean. A rough table, 2 chairs, an iron stove, and a narrow cot with a folded blanket. Everett went to the stove and checked it, then nodded in satisfaction. "Still has kindling. I will get a fire going, and you can rest." Juliana sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. She watched Everett move around the cabin with efficient, economical motions, building a fire in the stove, filling a dented pot with water from his canteen. Within minutes, warmth began to spread through the small space. "Drink this," Everett said, handing her a tin cup filled with water. Slowly. The water was cool and clean, and it soothed her ravaged throat. Juliana drank it all, then accepted a second cup gratefully. Everett pulled the other chair closer and sat down across from her, his elbows on his knees, studying her face. You need to see a doctor, he said. I will be fine, Juliana said automatically. Your voice is rough and you are still coughing. Smoke like that, it can damage your lungs. I said I will be fine. She heard the sharpness in her own voice and winced. I am sorry. I did not mean to snap. I do not have money for a doctor. I do not have money for anything. Everett leaned back in his chair. I have some money. Not much, but enough for a doctor and supplies for a few days. After that, well, we will figure something out. You do not owe me anything, Juliana said. You have already done so much. I am not doing it because I owe you, Everett said quietly. I am doing it because it is right. They looked at each other across the small space of the cabin, and Juliana felt something shift in her chest, something she could not name. This man, this stranger, had more honor in his little finger than her uncle had in his entire body. He had risked his life for her without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. It was so foreign to her experience that she hardly knew how to respond. Why? She asked finally. Why did you help me? You do not know me. Everett was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. When I was 15, he said slowly, my mother tried to leave my father. He was a hard man, a mean drunk, and he made our lives hell. One night, she finally worked up the courage to pack a bag and run. My father caught her before she made it out of the house. He beat her so badly that she could not walk for a week. And I stood there and watched, too scared to do anything, too small to stop him. He paused, his jaw tight. She died 2 years later. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I knew better. My father had broken something in her that night, something that never healed. And I swore that if I ever saw another man hurting a woman, I would not stand by and do nothing. I would not be that scared boy again. Juliana felt tears prick at her eyes. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry that happened to you. It was a long time ago, Everett said, but she could see the old grief in his face. My father is dead now, and my mother is at peace, but I remember, and I will always remember. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly in the stove. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Juliana's exhaustion was dragging at her, but she fought against it. There was so much to think about, so much to plan. What am I going to do? She said, more to herself than to Everett. I cannot go back. My uncle will lock me up again, or worse. And Silas Moreland, he has connections everywhere. If he wants to find me, he will. Then we make sure he cannot find you, Everett said. There are towns west of here, places where Moreland's influence does not reach. We can get you to one of them, help you find work, a place to stay. You keep saying we, Juliana said. You do not have to do this. You have done enough. Everett met her eyes, and there was a fierceness in his gaze that made her breath catch. If I leave you now, your uncle or Moreland will find you. You know it, and I know it. They will not let you go that easily. So yes, I am saying we, unless you do not want my help, in which case I will respect that. But I am offering. Juliana thought about it. About the alternatives. She could strike out on her own, but she had no skills beyond basic housekeeping and a little bit of bookkeeping she had learned from her father. She had no money, no contacts, no way to defend herself. With Everett, at least she had a chance. And more than that, she realized, she trusted him. It was foolish, perhaps, to trust a man she had just met, but her instincts told her he was honorable. He had already proven it. I want your help, she said, and I will repay you. I promise. However long it takes, I will pay you back for everything you are doing for me. Everett smiled just a little, and it transformed his face. Let us worry about that later. Right now, you need to rest. Take the cot. I will keep watch tonight. I cannot take your bed, Juliana protested, but Everett was already standing, moving toward the door. I have slept on the ground more nights than I can count. The cot is yours. I am going to check on my horse and make sure we were not followed. Lock the door behind me and do not open it unless you hear my voice." He stepped outside before she could argue further, and Juliana was left alone in the warm cabin. She locked the door, as he had instructed, then sank onto the cot. It was lumpy and narrow, but after hours on horseback and the terror of the smokehouse, it felt like heaven. She pulled the blanket over herself, still wearing Everett's jacket, and closed her eyes. She meant to stay awake, to listen for Everett's return, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, and when she woke hours later, the cabin was dark except for the faint glow of the banked fire. She could just make out Everett's form in the corner, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He was asleep, or appeared to be, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. Juliana watched him for a long moment, this man who had upended her entire life in the span of a few hours. She wondered what his story was, beyond the tragedy he had shared about his mother. Where had he come from? Where was he going before he stopped to save her? Did he have family, friends, a home somewhere? She realized she wanted to know. She wanted to know everything about Everett Dalton. The thought should have scared her, but instead, it filled her with a strange, tentative warmth. For the first time in years, she felt something other than despair when she thought about the future. The next morning, they ate a sparse breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Everett's saddlebags, washed down with water from the creek. Juliana's throat felt better, though her voice was still hoarse and the cough had eased. Everett studied her critically in the morning light, then nodded. "You look stronger," he said, "but we should still get you to a doctor when we can." They packed up the few things they had used, made sure the cabin was as they had found it, and set out again. This time, Everett kept them off the main trails, following game paths and creek beds that would hide their tracks. He rode with his head up, constantly scanning the horizon, and Juliana realized he was expecting pursuit. "Do you think my uncle will come after us?" she asked. "Maybe," Everett said. "But I think it is more likely he will send word to Moreland and let him do the hunting. Moreland has more men, more resources. He is the real danger." The thought sent a chill through Juliana. Silas Moreland was a powerful man, ruthless and vindictive. If he felt his pride had been injured by her escape, he would not rest until he had dragged her back, and what he would do to Everett for interfering did not bear thinking about. "Maybe I should go alone," she said suddenly. "Maybe if you go back and tell them I ran off in the night, they will leave you alone." Everett pulled the horse to a stop and turned in the saddle to look at her. "No," he said flatly. "That is not happening. But you could be killed because of me," Juliana said. "I do not want that on my conscience." "And I will not have your death on mine," Everett said. "We are in this together now, Juliana. I am not leaving you, and that is final." The way he said her name, gentle but firm, made her heart skip. She nodded slowly and tightened her arms around his waist. Together, then. They rode for 3 more days, traveling slowly and carefully, always staying off the main roads. At night, they camped in hidden places, sheltered by rocks or trees, and Everett taught her how to keep watch, how to listen for the sounds that did not belong. He was patient and kind, never making her feel foolish for her ignorance. On the 3rd night, as they sat by a small fire, eating beans and bacon Everett had cooked in a battered skillet, Juliana worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Where were you going before you found me? You said you were looking for work." Everett poked at the fire with a stick, his expression distant. "Nowhere in particular," he said. "I have been drifting for a few years now, working ranches when I need money, moving on when the season ends. I was in Montana last year, Wyoming before that. Idaho seemed like as good a place as any to spend the winter." "That sounds lonely," Juliana said softly. Everett shrugged. "I am used to it. After my mother died, I left home and never looked back. My father drank himself to death a year later, and I did not even go to his funeral. I have been on my own ever since. Do you ever wish you had a place to settle? A home? He looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Sometimes, he said, when I see families, people who have built something together, I wonder what that would be like. But I have never found a place that felt worth staying for. Until maybe now. Juliana's breath caught. What do you mean? Everett set down his plate and moved a little closer. I mean that these last few days, helping you, protecting you, it has felt like the most important thing I have ever done. I know we just met and I know you do not owe me anything, but I want you to know that I am not helping you because I feel obligated. I am helping you because I want to. I want you to, Juliana said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. I want you to stay. I do not know what I would do without you, Everett. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers were warm and calloused, the touch unbearably gentle. You are stronger than you think, he said, but I am glad I can be here for you. They were so close now that Juliana could see the individual lashes framing his gray eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She knew she should pull back, should remember that she barely knew this man, but she did not want to. She wanted to lean in, to close the distance between them, to feel something other than fear and desperation. But before either of them could move, Everett's horse whinnied sharply, and he was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his gun. Juliana scrambled up as well, her heart pounding. What is it? She whispered. Someone is coming, Everett said, his voice low and tense. Stay behind me. He kicked dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. Juliana pressed close to his back, straining to hear over the pounding of her own heart. And then she heard it. The sound of hooves, multiple horses, moving through the trees toward their camp. Everett pulled her behind a boulder, his arm around her shoulders, holding her still. They waited in the darkness, barely breathing, as the riders came closer. Juliana could see the flicker of torches through the trees now, could hear men's voices calling to each other. Spread out! They cannot have gone far. Moreland wants them alive, remember. The girl especially. I remember. But the cowboy, he is fair game once we have her. Juliana bit her lip to keep from making a sound. Moreland's men, they had found them somehow, tracked them through miles of wilderness. She felt Everett's arm tighten around her, protective and strong. The riders passed within 20 feet of their hiding spot, so close that Juliana could see their faces in the torchlight. There were 6 of them, all armed, all hard-eyed. They spent several minutes searching the area around the now dead campfire, cursing when they realized their quarry had slipped away. They were here, one of the men said. Fire is still warm. Then they are close, another replied. Keep looking. But after another few minutes of fruitless searching, the men mounted up and rode on, heading north. Everett and Juliana stayed hidden for a long time after the sound of hooves had faded, making sure it was not a trick. Finally, Everett relaxed slightly. We need to move, he said quietly. Now, they will circle back when they do not find us ahead. They gathered their few belongings in the dark, working quickly and silently. Everett saddled his horse by feel, and then they were riding again, heading west this time, away from the path Moreland's men had taken. They rode through the night, and Juliana fought to stay awake, clinging to Everett's back. Dawn found them miles away, in a narrow canyon with steep walls on either side. Everett finally stopped and let Juliana slide down, catching her when her legs buckled. I am sorry, he said. I know you are exhausted, but we had to put distance between us and them. I know, Juliana said. She was beyond tired now, running on sheer determination and fear. How did they find us? I do not know, Everett admitted. I was careful. We stayed off the roads. We hit our tracks. Either they have a tracker who is better than I thought, or they got lucky. What do we do now? Everett looked up at the steep canyon walls, then back the way they had come. We keep moving. If we can make it to Silver City, we might be able to lose them. It is a big enough town that strangers do not stand out, and Moreland's reach does not extend that far west. How far is Silver City? 2 days, maybe 3 if we have to keep hiding. Can you make it? Juliana straightened, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. I can make it. Everett smiled at her, warm and approving. I know you can. They rested for a few hours in the canyon, taking turns keeping watch. When the sun was high enough to warm the cold October air, they set out again. The landscape changed as they traveled west, becoming more rugged and mountainous. Juliana had never been this far from home, and despite her fear and exhaustion, she could not help but be awed by the wild beauty around them. That night, they found shelter in an abandoned prospector's shack, the remnants of some long-ago gold rush dream. It was more weathered than the line cabin had been, the roof half collapsed, but it was better than sleeping in the open. Everett built a tiny fire in the corner where the roof was still intact, just enough to take the chill off, and they shared another meal of beans and bacon. Tell me about your life before, Everett said as they ate. Before your uncle, before all of this. What was it like? Juliana was quiet for a moment, remembering. It was good, she said finally. My father owned a dry goods store in Snake River. It was not much, but it was ours. My mother helped him run it, and I grew up sorting inventory and learning bookkeeping. We were happy, and then the fever came. How old were you when they died? 17. Old enough to think I could manage on my own, but the debts my father left were more than I knew. The store was seized, and Samuel came to collect me. He is my mother's brother, but we had never been close. He made it clear from the start that I was a burden, another mouth to feed. When Moreland made his offer, Samuel saw it as a way to get rid of me and solve his money problems at the same time. Your father's debts were not your responsibility, Everett said, anger threading through his voice. Your uncle had no right to sell you to pay them. I know that now, Juliana said, but at the time, I did not know what else to do. I had no other family, no friends who could take me in. I thought I had to accept whatever Samuel decided. And then you found your courage, Everett said. You said no. Juliana met his eyes across the small fire. I found my limit, she said. I realized that marrying Moreland would be worse than anything else that could happen to me. And I guess I was right, because he is hunting me like an animal now. He will not find you, Everett said with fierce conviction. I will not let him. That night, exhausted as she was, Juliana had trouble sleeping. Every sound made her jump. Every creak of the old shack's timbers sounded like approaching footsteps. She lay on the floor, wrapped in Everett's jacket and the single blanket they shared, staring up at the stars visible through the holes in the roof. Juliana? Everett's voice came from where he sat near the door, keeping watch. Yes? Are you all right? I cannot sleep, she admitted. I keep thinking about Moreland's men, about what will happen if they find us. She heard him move, and then he was kneeling beside her, close enough that she could see his face in the starlight. They will not find us, he said. And even if they do, I will not let them take you, I promise. You cannot promise that, Juliana said. They outnumber us. They have guns. So do I, Everett said. And I have something they do not. I have a reason to fight. Juliana reached out and took his hand, twining her fingers through his. I am scared, she whispered. I am so scared, Everett. He squeezed her hand gently. I know, but you are also brave. You stood up to your uncle. You refused to marry a man you knew was cruel. That took courage most people do not have. I do not feel brave. I feel like I am running away. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do, Everett said. Sometimes the strongest choice is to refuse to accept what other people have decided for you. They stayed like that for a long time, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. And slowly, Juliana felt her fear begin to ease. Not disappear, but become manageable. As long as Everett was beside her, she could face whatever came. Finally, she drifted off to sleep, and when she woke hours later to the gray light of pre-dawn, she found that Everett had covered her with his own coat as well as the blanket. He was still sitting by the door, still keeping watch, and when he saw she was awake, he smiled at her. "Morning," he said softly. "Ready to keep moving?" She was not, but she nodded anyway. They had no choice. They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and water, then set out once more. The mountains grew steeper as they traveled, the trails rougher. Everett's horse was tired, and Juliana insisted they stop more often to let the animal rest. Everett agreed, though she could see the tension in him, the constant vigilance. On the second day after leaving the canyon, they crested a ridge and saw Silver City spread out in the valley below. It was a real town, bigger than Snake River, with proper streets and buildings, a church steeple rising above the rooflines. Juliana felt a surge of hope. In a place like that, surely they could disappear. But as they started down the ridge, Everett suddenly pulled the horse to a stop. "Wait!" he said, his voice sharp. Juliana followed his gaze and felt her heart sink. On the road leading into town from the south, a group of riders was approaching. Even at this distance, she could see the dust they were kicking up, could count at least 8 horses. "It could be anyone," she said, but she did not believe it. "Or it could be Moreland's men," Everett said grimly. "They might have guessed we were heading here and circled ahead. What do we do?" Everett scanned the landscape, thinking fast. "There," he said, pointing to a cluster of buildings on the northern edge of town. "That looks like a livery stable. If we can get there without being seen, we can stable the horse and blend in with the townspeople. They are looking for 2 people on horseback. If we are on foot, we will be harder to spot." It was a risk, but everything was a risk now. They made their way down the ridge carefully, staying in the cover of rocks and scrub trees. By the time they reached the edge of town, Juliana's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, but luck was with them. The riders, whoever they were, had gone straight down the main street and out of sight. The livery stable was run by a grizzled old man who eyed them suspiciously, but accepted Everett's money without asking questions. Everett arranged for his horse to be fed and rested. Then he and Juliana slipped out the back door into the maze of alleys behind the main street. "We need to find a place to stay," Everett said. "Somewhere quiet where we will not attract attention." They found a boarding house 2 streets over from the main thoroughfare, a modest building with faded paint and lace curtains in the windows. The woman who ran it, a stout widow named Mrs. Henderson, looked them over with sharp eyes. "We do not allow trouble here," she said firmly, "and I do not rent rooms to unmarried couples." Juliana opened her mouth to explain, but Everett was faster. "We are married," he said smoothly. "Just arrived from Idaho, looking for work. My wife has been ill, and we need a place to rest for a few days." "Mrs. Z is," Henderson's expression softened a fraction. "Married, you say? You have papers?" "Lost them in a fire," Everett said without missing a beat. "Lost almost everything we had. That is why we are here, trying to start over." It was a plausible story, and Juliana could see Mrs. Henderson weighing it. Finally, the older woman nodded. "I have a room on the 2nd floor. Small, but clean. $3 a week, paid in advance, and that includes breakfast and supper." Everett counted out the money without hesitation, though Juliana knew it must be a significant portion of what he had left. Mrs. Henderson pocketed the cash and led them upstairs to a tiny room with a single bed, a washstand, and a chair. It was sparse, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Henderson said. No drinking, no smoking, no loud noise. You break my rules. You are out. Understood? Understood, Everett said. Thank you, madam. When the door closed behind her, Juliana let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. We are married now, she said, a note of hysteria creeping into her voice. Everett had the grace to look sheepish. It was the only way she would rent to us. I am sorry. I should have asked you first. No, no, it is fine, Juliana said, laughing a little wildly. It makes sense. It is just everything has happened so fast. She sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed. In less than a week, she had gone from being a prisoner in her uncle's house to a fugitive hiding in a strange town, pretending to be married to a man she barely knew. It was too much, all of it. Everett knelt in front of her, his hands on her knees, his face level with hers. Hey, he said gently. Look at me. Juliana raised her eyes to his, and the kindness she saw there steadied her. We are going to be all right, Everett said. We made it this far, and we will figure out the rest, one day at a time. Can you do that? Juliana nodded, not trusting her voice. Everett reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek, a tear she had not even realized she was shedding. You are not alone, he said. I am right here, and I am not going anywhere. That night at supper, they met the other boarders, a young school teacher named Miss Appleby, a traveling salesman named Mr. Gordon, and an elderly prospector named Hank, who regaled them with tales of striking it rich in the goldfields. Everett played his role perfectly, the attentive husband, solicitous of his ailing wife. He called Juliana darling and made sure she had the best portions of food, and Juliana found herself blushing at the tenderness in his voice, even though she knew it was just an act. Or was it? When they returned to their room that night and Everett insisted she take the bed while he made a pallet on the floor, the look in his eyes was not that of a man pretending. And when Juliana lay in the dark, listening to his steady breathing, she realized that somewhere along the way, between the Smokehouse and Silver City, she had started to fall in love with him. It was madness. She had known him less than a week, but he had saved her life, protected her, treated her with more respect and kindness than anyone had in years. He had risked everything for her, and he asked for nothing in return. How could she not love him? The question was, did he feel the same? Or was she just a responsibility to him, a damsel in distress who needed rescuing? Juliana did not know, and she was afraid to ask, afraid that if she spoke her feelings aloud, she would shatter the fragile bond between them. The next morning, Everett went out to scout the town to see if Moreland's men were still searching for them. He told Juliana to stay in the room, to keep out of sight, and she agreed reluctantly. The hours dragged by. She paced the small room, stared out the window at the street below, and tried not to imagine all the terrible things that could be happening to Everett. When he finally returned in the late afternoon, she nearly collapsed with relief. Thank God, she said. I was so worried. I am fine, Everett assured her. He looked tired but unharmed. But we have a problem. Moreland's men are here. They are asking questions, showing people a description of you. It is only a matter of time before someone remembers seeing us. Juliana's stomach twisted with fear. What do we do? Everett sat down on the edge of the bed, thinking hard. We have two options. We can leave tonight, keep running, and hope we can stay ahead of them. Or we can stay and try to find a way to end this, to make Moreland stop hunting us. How would we do that? Juliana asked. He is powerful and rich. We are nobody. He is powerful in Idaho, Everett said. But Silver City is outside his usual reach. The law here might actually listen to us. If we can get you to talk to a judge or a marshal, tell them what your uncle did, what Moreland is trying to do, they might intervene. You think they would care, Juliana said bitterly. I am just a woman. Moreland is a cattle baron. Maybe. Everett said, but there are good lawmen out there, men who believe in justice. It is worth trying, because if we keep running, Juliana, we will never be free. Moreland will chase us until he catches us, or until we are so far from civilization that we might as well be ghosts. Juliana considered this. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid. If there was even a chance that they could stop this, that she could reclaim her life, it was worth the risk. All right, she said. Let us try. The next morning, they went to the marshal's office. The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s named Henry Colt, with iron gray hair and shrewd eyes. He listened to Juliana's story without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and regarded them both. That is quite a tale, he said finally. You have any proof of what you are saying? The burn marks on my throat from the smoke, Juliana said, pulling down the collar of her dress to show the reddened skin. The fact that Moreland's men are combing this town looking for me. The fact that I am here, running for my life, instead of safe at home. Marshal Colt frowned. I know Silas Moreland by reputation, he said. He is not well liked, but he is powerful. If I go after him based on your word alone, he will make trouble for this town. So you will do nothing? Everett said, his voice hard. You will let him drag her back to Idaho and force her into marriage? I did not say that, Marshal Colt replied evenly. I said I need more than your word. If you can get me proof, something concrete, I can act. Until then, my hands are tied. It was not the answer they had hoped for, but it was not a flat refusal either. Juliana and Everett left the marshal's office, feeling frustrated but not defeated. They spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to get the proof Marshal Colt needed. That evening, as they ate supper with the other boarders, Mr. Gordon, the traveling salesman, mentioned that he had just come from Snake River. Interesting place, he said. Lots of tension there right now. Seems the local cattle baron, fellow named Moreland, is in a rage about something. Has half his men out searching the territory. Everett and Juliana exchanged a glance but said nothing. After supper, they retreated to their room, and Everett began to pace. We need to get someone to testify against your uncle, he said. Someone who saw what he did, who will stand up in front of a judge and tell the truth. Who would do that? Juliana said. Everyone in that valley is afraid of Samuel, or beholden to him in some way. What about his ranch hands? There were 2 of them in the yard when I broke you out. They saw everything. They work for him. They would never betray him. Everett stopped pacing. Maybe. Or maybe one of them has a conscience. People are not all bad, Juliana. Sometimes they just need a reason to do the right thing. It was a slim hope, but it was better than nothing. They spent the next 2 days carefully observing Moreland's men as they searched Silver City. There were 8 of them in total, hard-faced and well-armed. They questioned shopkeepers, checked hotels and boarding houses, and showed a sketch of Juliana to anyone who would look. On the 3rd day, Juliana spotted one of them entering a saloon alone. She recognized him immediately. Tom Crawford, one of her uncle's ranch hands. He had been there the day Everett broke her out of the smokehouse, standing silent while Samuel raged. That is him, she said to Everett, pointing. That is one of the men who was there. Everett studied Crawford through the saloon window. He is alone, that is good. Maybe I can talk to him. Feel him out. That is too dangerous, Juliana protested. What if he recognizes you? He will recognize me either way, Everett said. At least this way, I can control the conversation. Before Juliana could stop him, he walked into the saloon. She waited outside, heart pounding, ready to run if things went wrong. Minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, Everett emerged, his face thoughtful. Well? Juliana demanded. He is not a bad man, Everett said slowly. Just a man who made poor choices. He does not like what your uncle did to you, but he is afraid of losing his job. He has a wife and 2 kids to support. So he would not help us, Juliana said, deflating. I did not say that. Everett took her arm and steered her back toward the boarding house. I said he is afraid, but I think if we can offer him protection, if we can guarantee that Samuel and Moreland cannot retaliate against him, he might be willing to testify. How do we do that? We talk to Marshall Colt again. We tell him we have a potential witness, and we get him to agree to protect Crawford and his family. It took some convincing, but Marshall Colt eventually agreed. He was a lawman who believed in justice, and the more he heard about Silas Moreland and Samuel Reeves, the less he liked them. He agreed to offer Tom Crawford and his family protection in exchange for testimony. Getting Crawford to agree was harder. Everett and Marshall Colt approached him together the next day in a quiet corner of the saloon. Crawford listened to their offer, his face troubled. "If I do this, Reeves will kill me," he said. "Or Moreland will." "Not if you are under the protection of the law," Marshall Colt said. "I will personally guarantee your safety and your family's safety." "And if Moreland's influence reaches here," Crawford said, "he has friends everywhere." "Then you take your family and go somewhere his influence does not reach," Everett said. "Montana, Wyoming, California. I will give you money to start over, enough to get you on your feet." Crawford looked at him in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "Because what Samuel Reeves did to Juliana was wrong," Everett said. "And because you saw it happen, and you have been carrying that guilt ever since. I can see it in your eyes. This is your chance to make it right." Crawford was silent for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. "All right," he said. "I will testify. God help me, but I will do it." With Crawford's testimony, Marshall Colt had enough to issue warrants for Samuel Reeves and to question Silas Moreland. He sent word to the marshal in Snake River asking for assistance, and within a week, Samuel had been arrested. Moreland, too wealthy and connected to be jailed on mere testimony, was nevertheless warned that if he continued to harass Juliana or pursue her unlawfully, he would face charges. It was not perfect justice, but it was enough. Samuel Reeves would stand trial for assault and false imprisonment. Tom Crawford and his family were relocated to Wyoming with money from Everett's rapidly dwindling funds, and Juliana, for the first time in years, was free. She stood on the steps of the marshal's office, looking out at the bustling streets of Silver City, and felt tears streaming down her face. Everett put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. "It is over," he said gently. "You are safe now." "Because of you," Juliana said, turning to look up at him. "You saved my life, Everett. In every way a person can be saved." He smiled, that warm, transformative smile that made her heart ache. "You saved yourself," he said. "I just helped a little." They walked back to the boarding house together, hand in hand, and Juliana realized that for the first time, she could think about the future without fear. But what future? She was free, but she was still penniless, still without prospects. And Everett, he had spent almost all his money helping her. What would happen now? That night, as they sat in their small room, Juliana finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "What happens now? To us, I mean." Everett was sitting in the chair by the window, and he looked up at her, his expression serious. "That depends on you," he said. "I told you from the start that I would help you until you were safe. You are safe now. If you want me to leave, to let you start your life here without me, I will. I will not hold you to anything." Juliana's heart clenched. "Is that what you want? To leave?" "No," Everett said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "No, Juliana, that is the last thing I want. But I need you to tell me what you want. Because I know we have been pretending to be married, and I know this whole situation has been forced on you. I do not want you to feel obligated to me." Juliana stood and crossed the room to him. She took his hands in hers, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "I do not feel obligated to you, Everett. I feel grateful, yes, but more than that, I feel—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like I have found something I did not even know I was looking for. You make me feel safe and seen and valued. You have treated me with more kindness and respect than anyone in my life, and I think I am falling in love with you." Everett stood so quickly that the chair nearly tipped over. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "You think you are falling in love with me?" "No," Juliana said, and she saw the flash of hurt in his eyes before she continued. "No, I know I am. I love you, Everett. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you see the best in people. I love that you risked your life for a stranger, and I love that you have stayed with me, even when it would have been easier to walk away. I love you." The smile that broke across Everett's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "I love you too," he said, and then he was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Juliana wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her hope and gratitude and love into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Everett rested his forehead against hers. "I have been in love with you since the moment I pulled you out of that smokehouse," he said. "I just did not know if I had the right to say it." "You have every right," Juliana whispered. "You have my heart, Everett Dalton, all of it." They talked late into the night, making plans for the future. Everett had a little money left, enough to buy supplies and maybe a piece of land if they were careful. Juliana had her bookkeeping skills and a willingness to work hard. Together they could build something, a life that was theirs. But first, there was something Juliana wanted to do. "I want to marry you," she said. "For real, not just pretend. I want to stand in front of a preacher and vow to spend my life with you." Everett's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" "You do not have to, Juliana. We can take our time." "I have never been more sure of anything," Juliana said. "I want to be your wife, Everett, if you will have me." "If I will have you?" Everett laughed, a joyful sound. "Juliana, I would marry you tomorrow if you would let me." "Then let us do it tomorrow," Juliana said, grinning. They were married 3 days later, in a small ceremony at the Silver City Church. Marshall Colt stood as witness, along with Mrs. Henderson and Miss Appleby from the boarding house. Juliana wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had lent her, and Everett wore his best shirt, cleaned and pressed. They spoke their vows in steady voices, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Everett kissed her with such tenderness that Juliana felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. After the wedding, they had a modest celebration at the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson had baked a cake, and Mr. Gordon had contributed a bottle of champagne. It was nothing like the grand weddings Juliana had read about in novels, but it was perfect. It was theirs. That night, as they lay together in their small room, now truly husband and wife, Juliana felt a peace she had never known. Everett held her close, his hand stroking her hair, and whispered promises of the life they would build together. "I will spend every day of my life making you happy," he said. "That is my vow to you, Juliana. Not just today, but every day." "You already make me happy," Juliana said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Just by being you." They stayed in Silver City through the winter, saving money and planning their next move. Everett found work as a foreman on a local ranch, and Juliana took a job keeping books for the general store. It was hard work, but honest work, and for the first time in her life, Juliana felt like she was building something that mattered. In the spring of 1879, they bought a small parcel of land 20 miles outside Silver City, in a valley with good water and rich soil. It was not much, just 80 acres, but it was theirs. They built a cabin with their own hands, working from dawn to dusk, and by summer they had a home. Everett proved to be a skilled rancher. He bought a few head of cattle with the last of their savings and slowly built up a herd. Juliana started a vegetable garden and learned to can and preserve food for the winter. They worked together, side by side, and every night they fell into bed, exhausted but content. Their first child, a son they named William, was born in the spring of 1880. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from the moment Juliana held him, she knew that her life had come full circle. She had gone from being a prisoner in a smokehouse to being a mother, a wife, a woman with a home and a future. Everett was a devoted father. He would spend hours with William, teaching him to ride, to work with the cattle, to respect the land. And when their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born 2 years later, Everett's joy was complete. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and simple pleasures. The ranch prospered, slowly but steadily. Everett hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, men he trusted and treated fairly. Juliana expanded her garden and started selling vegetables and preserves in Silver City. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Samuel Reeves was convicted of assault and spent 3 years in prison. When he was released, he left Idaho and was never heard from again. Silas Moreland, his pride wounded and his plans thwarted, eventually married someone else, a young woman from Montana whose family was as powerful as his own. Juliana heard about it from travelers passing through and felt nothing but relief that she had escaped that fate. Tom Crawford and his family thrived in Wyoming. He wrote to Everett occasionally, thanking him for giving them a new start, and Everett always wrote back, encouraging and kind. The two men never met again, but their brief connection had changed both their lives. As the years turned into decades, Juliana and Everett grew old together. They watched their children grow up, marry, and have children of their own. They saw Idaho change from a wild territory to a settled state. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, good years and bad, always together, always in love. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in the spring of 1904, Juliana and Everett stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. William, now a grown man with a family of his own, was running the ranch alongside his father. Sarah had married a lawyer in Boise and visited often with her husband and 3 children. "Did you ever imagine this?" Juliana asked, leaning against Everett's shoulder. "When you broke that lock on the smokehouse, did you ever think we would end up here?" Everett wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I did not let myself imagine anything that day," he said. "I just knew I had to get you out, had to save you. Everything else was a gift I never expected." "You gave me my life back," Juliana said. "You gave me everything." "No," Everett said, turning to look at her. Even at 52, his eyes still had that same intensity, that same warmth that had captured her heart all those years ago. "You gave yourself your life back when you refused to marry Moreland, when you chose freedom over safety. I just happened to be there at the right time. The rest, all of this, we built it together." Juliana kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss that held 25 years of love and partnership. "Together," she agreed. "Always together." As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Juliana thought back to that terrified girl choking on smoke in a locked shed. She thought about the cowboy who had broken the lock and faced her captors, risking everything for a stranger. And she thought about all the days and years that had followed, each one a blessing, each one proof that love and courage could triumph over cruelty and fear. They had built a legacy together, not just in the land and the cattle and the ranch, but in their children and grandchildren, in the example they had set of what true partnership looked like. Juliana had learned that love was not just passion and romance, though they had had plenty of both. Love was also the quiet moments, the shared work, the willingness to stand together against whatever the world threw at them. When William took over the ranch completely in 1910, Everett and Juliana moved into a smaller house on the property, content to spend their remaining years watching their family flourish. They still worked in the garden together, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. They still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same love and respect that had carried them through decades of marriage. Everett passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1915 at the age of 63. Juliana held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering her love and gratitude. She mourned him deeply, but she did not regret a single day of their life together. He had been her savior, her partner, her best friend, and the great love of her life. Juliana lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days, of the Wild West that was rapidly disappearing into history. She told them about the smokehouse and the brave cowboy who had saved her. She told them about building the ranch, about the hard years and the good ones, about what it meant to love someone with your whole heart. When Juliana died in the spring of 1923, at the age of 67, she was buried next to Everett on a hill overlooking the valley they had claimed as their own. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, and they spoke of the legacy Juliana and Everett had left behind. Not just the prosperous ranch and the thriving family, but the example of courage and love that had defined their lives. The smokehouse where Juliana had nearly died was long gone, torn down decades before. But the memory of what had happened there and what had followed lived on. It was a story passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, salvation can come. Sometimes it comes in the form of a cowboy breaking a lock and facing down those who would do harm. Sometimes it comes in the form of love, fierce and true and enduring. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, it comes as both. Juliana Reeves and Everett Dalton had been lucky in exactly that way. They had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built a life together that was better than either could have dreamed. They had loved deeply, lived fully, and left behind a legacy that would endure long after the Wild West had faded into memory. Their story, like all the best love stories, ended not with tragedy, but with triumph, not with separation, but with a lifetime of togetherness, not with regret, but with gratitude for every moment, every struggle, every joy they had shared. It was a story of courage and redemption, of a woman who refused to accept the fate others had chosen for her, and a man who was willing to risk everything to help her claim her freedom. In the end, that smokehouse and the broken lock that had freed her became symbols of something larger. They represented the breaking of chains, the refusal to accept injustice, and the power of one person to change another's life forever. Everett had broken more than just a lock that day. He had broken the hold that fear and cruelty had on Juliana's life, and in doing so, he had freed them both to live and love and build something beautiful together. Their great-grandchildren would eventually sell the ranch, moving on to modern lives in cities far from the Idaho Valley where Juliana and Everett had made their stand. But they carried the story with them, a piece of family history that explained where they came from and what they valued. And sometimes when life was hard and the future uncertain, they would remember the tale of the smokehouse and the cowboy, and they would find the courage to face their own challenges, because that was the real gift Juliana and Everett had left behind. Not land or money or even the family name. They had left behind the knowledge that courage and love could overcome anything, that one person could make a difference, and that the choices we make in our darkest moments define who we become in the light. They had proven that it was possible to take a life marked by fear and pain and transform it into something beautiful and meaningful. Juliana had gone from captive to survivor, to wife to mother to grandmother to great-grandmother, each role building on the one before. Everett had gone from drifting cowboy to hero, to husband, to father, to grandfather, to great-grandfather, finding in each stage of life new purpose and new joy. Together, they had created a love story that spanned nearly 4 decades, a romance that was tested by hardship and strengthened by shared struggles. Theirs was not a fairy tale with magic and impossible perfection. It was something better, a real love story, grounded in the messy, difficult, wonderful reality of life. They had fought and made up, struggled and persevered, faced setbacks and celebrated victories. They had raised children who sometimes tested their patience, worked land that sometimes seemed determined to defeat them, and lived through times when the future seemed uncertain. But through it all, they had held fast to each other and to the vows they had spoken in that little church in Silver City. The smoke that had nearly killed Juliana became a distant memory, replaced by the smoke of countless campfires and home fires, the good smoke of life being lived. The locked door became a symbol not of imprisonment, but of the barrier that had been broken, allowing her to step into freedom and into love. And the cowboy who had broken that lock became not just her savior, but her partner in every sense of the word, the man who taught her that she could trust and be trusted, that she could love and be loved, that she could build and be built up. In the final accounting, their story was one of hope. Hope that even when circumstances seem darkest, change is possible. Hope that good people still exist in the world, people willing to put themselves at risk for others. Hope that love, real and deep and enduring, is not just the stuff of novels, but something that can be found and nurtured and cherished in real life. Juliana and Everett Dalton lived and loved and left behind a legacy that honored both of them. They proved that a life can be redeemed, that a future can be rewritten, and that the chains others try to put on us can be broken if we have the courage to try and the good fortune to find someone willing to help us break free. Their story ended as all stories must, but the love they shared, the example they set, and the family they built continued long after they were gone, a testament to the power of one moment, one choice, one act of courage that changed everything. And so the smokehouse, symbol of captivity and fear, was transformed in memory into something else entirely. The place where Juliana's real life began, the place where she was set free not just by the breaking of a lock, but by the beginning of a love that would sustain her for the rest of her days. It was the end of one story and the beginning of another, better one, and that made all the difference.